Hey, good morning, everyone. Dr. R. Michael Fisher, Fearologist, artist, educator, researcher, and follower of what's going on in the culture today, the culture of fear, the culture wars, the culture burning. Yes, some difficult times going on, certainly with police brutality issues in the United States. Don't want to ignore that as part of the news, the emergency time, and how leaders and all kinds of peoples, the highers, the elites, the lower, the grassroots, are going to deal with emergency time. And my view, my podcasts here are to look at getting out and beyond fear-based ways of looking and thinking and perceiving and acting to a more visionary but real and even pessimistic, if need be, reality. So reality always open for contention, of course. What I wanted to cover this morning very briefly in this short video is Michael Moore, the film he is executive producer of, The Planet of the Humans. Jeff Gibbs is the director. Ozzie Zehner is the other producer. Michael Moore just interviewed, I'm going to put a link below, by Rolling Stone, a program called Useful Idiots, a couple of young, Gen X, Y type young people who importantly have a vested interest in what Michael Moore is doing in his art, his films. And I also have other links I will put below of other videos I have done on Michael Moore, several of them over the last couple of years. It also is going to link to Marianne Williamson, who I've also done some videos on, and I'm writing a book now, as you may know or may not know, on as well. So I'll make that link briefly too. Basically, of why Michael Moore has never stood up for or endorsed Marianne Williamson. And not that she's ever spoken out much either in support of Michael Moore and his movies, documentaries, and his politics. Let me get to the core of the recent interview on Rolling Stone, and I only watched just a part of it, but I just felt so important to get it up. That film, The Planet of the Humans, thank you, Jeff Gibbs, for directing it and writing it in the way you did and risking. I've discussed that film in a conversation with Sheldon Solomon, the terror management theory guy who is in that movie as well. So you can look at that video I've created. So Michael Moore has asked the question, which I did not know had happened recently, that the movie that they put up online on Michael Moore's YouTube channel and offered it free because of the coronavirus pandemic. They were going to release it in the fall, and no, that was not going to be a good plan, especially not being uncertain that people would be going to theaters, period, for a long time. So put it up on the YouTube, offered it free. Up to 6 million plus people have watched it, which is an unbelievable precedent. And the film, just very briefly again, is a critique of a lot of the green, environmental, alternative energy, economic kinds of planning thinking that's been going on since, the good old Earth days, 1960s, 70s, coming out with the ecological movement, environmental movement, and all these great intentions. I've been part of that movement. But the film really goes after some of the downsides, the shadow sides, the sleeping with the corporations and capitalism in ways that Jeff Gibbs reveals, I think, quite powerfully. And we'll leave it at that. You can make your own decisions. Here's what Michael Moore said in regard to, just talking about how YouTube has pulled that film. And also remember that when that film first came out, again, just a few months ago, it was also attacked by environmental groups and so on. And eventually a particular environmental film library pulled it off on their shelves as well. And so censorship was going on. And I think that institution since then had said, oh no, we're going to put it back on. We're not in the business of censoring, environmental films. So that's great. However, now YouTube, and that's of course the huge, total big venue for the film. It's a massive decision on YouTube's part, and what are the politics behind it? Apparently, I haven't listened to this whole Rolling Stone interview, but there's some small technical detail of something like a few seconds of the film that somehow is deemed as contrary to YouTube's public protocols. Not interested in that at the moment. The symbolic nature of this move is huge, and it's huge because of my interest in the terror management issues that are raised by Jack Gibbs' film. Again, that's in my talk with Sheldon Solomon. But here's what Moore said in talking about the film in general in the first part of this interview in Rolling Stone. He said, it was very hard for us, the three of them, and we wished that we didn't have to be in this position, but nobody was willing to ask the questions that we wanted to ask. And really, he's talking about in the last 50 years, because both Jeff Gibbs and Michael Moore were around in the environmental movement at the first Earth Day in 1970. And I remember that. I was in grade 12. And then basically Moore says some of them believe, the ones that are attacking the film, probably the ones that pulled it off of YouTube, some of them believe that capitalism is the way out of climate crisis. Catastrophe is his word. End of quote. And that pretty much sums up just what I wanted to pass by you to consider and think about, and do maybe some of your own research on, and comment on my video here and share it as well. I think we really, as citizens of any kind of even liberal open-mindedness, critical education perspective, to have this kind of censorship of a really important movie. Serious stuff as far as I'm concerned. But again, I will emphasize the most serious part is because the questions, and this is what Moore is talking about, we raised questions nobody else would do, in 50 plus years of this movement, the green alternative, etc. The key question, in my view, and Solomon's view, is that Jeff Gibbs asked about, could it be that many of the green alternative energy leaders and their following are living in some kind of either delusion, illusion, call it what you will. And that's referenced in the film a few times, including Ozzie Zehner's book, I think it's called The Green Illusion, that he published years earlier. The conversation with Jeff Gibbs and Solomon, Dr. Solomon, in that film at one point, and it's just a small sequence, is pivotal in my view as a fearologist, because he raised the question, is it fear? Is it terror? A deep unconscious terror of our own death, our own mortality being triggered in these environmentalists, let's just call them that overall, and that in some sense they've thus made a defense against that death terror to the point where they are not thinking as rationally as maybe they think they are. That is a whole package of analysis right there that you could do and have a look at. So that's the questioning, in my view. There's other questions that Gibbs raises with Michael Moore, and that's true, and those are valuable questions, but I'm saying the most, from a fearological point of view, is this question that is in the movie. Jeff Gibbs asks that question of Dr. Solomon. Whoa. That's what I wanted to get out there. And the last part, why Michael Moore, Marianne Williamson, many others who I'd call in the alternative thinking, new way to go, um, highly ethical kind of vision for the future. I respect all of those kinds of views, and they need to be critiqued, which I also add to that critique. My work needs to be critiqued. But it's because Michael Moore said some of them believe capitalism is a way out of climate catastrophe and other problems. And I thought, oh, yeah, wow, that's right. That's like, no wonder, because Marianne Williamson and Moore comes out in this interview with Rolling Stone and says, I am not a capitalist. I do not buy that argument. And all my experience, all my knowledge of his career, 30 plus years of particularly making commentary in documentary films, very controversial ones on the nature and role of capitalism, specifically in America and America's history and so on. And Marianne Williamson, it definitely is not of that camp. She comes out many times, and it is recorded in my new book coming out soon in the summer, hopefully, the Marianne Williamson presidential phenomenon, that she is a believer in capitalism. She basically says there is a capitalism with a conscience, and I don't doubt that there is a capitalism with a conscience. It's still a question of whether that capitalism with a conscience is adequate to the task of analyzing critically and well and holistically and integratively and integrally the real problems of the fundamentals of capitalism and all of its dynamics. So that is the question. That is the tension Michael Moore, Marianne Williamson, I see as representing, not as just persons, but them representing phenomenon of challenge on that dynamic. And, you know, it's another question to ask me, I suppose, as a Fearological thinker and an educator, etc. What's my view on capitalism? And that would be a whole long course that would need to be developed and framed, and I would frame it in a very particular way, and that would be around an understanding of the nature and role of fear. And fear, which is culturally constructed fear, not just fear as an emotion or feeling. That's typically done in psychology and dominant discourses in this dominant worldview that we live in. Very much larger topic. So that's it for today, folks. Thanks for listening in, and take a check out on some of the things I brought up, if you will. And yeah, do comment. I'd like to chat with you. Let's chat together. And not only that, let's act together and really